Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this Governance Committee meeting on the Wednesday, the 2nd of August 2023. My name is Councillor Alan Platt and I'm Chair of this committee. Councillor Mark Clifford, to my right, is the Vice Chair. Please note this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. When you want to speak, please raise your hand. When I invite you to speak, please turn your microphone on. Please turn your microphone off when you finish speaking. If the technology fails, then I will adjourn the meeting for a few minutes to try to resolve the issue. Or, if this is not possible, a new date and time will be organised. Please can everyone ensure their phones are turned to silent. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm sounds, please exit the way you came in. We have apologies from Charlotte Fitch, the independent person. Any more? No? No? Lovely. Declarations of any interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any pecuniary interest in respect of any items contained in this agenda. Oh, sorry. Failed already. Sorry. Item 1, the minutes of the meeting Wednesday, 24th of May 2003 of the Governance Committee, pages 3 to 8 on your agenda. Councillor Hayden.
Visuals, so yeah, we've noticed the same thing.
Yeah, there was the list of attendees was short, and so it needs to be. Sorry, yeah.
Quite a few was missing off it.
Yeah. I think it was just to see whether we read them or not, wasn't it? Just a test.
I think that have been mentioned, so I'm guessing that will be addressed with you. Thank you very much. In that case, then, with the amendment, can we approve the minutes? Proposal, anybody? Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Clifford. Okay. We'll move on now to item 3, the External Audit Progress Report, pages 9 to 16 in your meeting papers, and we'll be in the capable hands of Georgia for this.
Thank you, Chair. So this is our regular progress update report that we bring to members so that you can see how the kind of external audit work is progressing. So this relates to the financial year 22-23, which is the year ended 31st of March 2023. So we've already kind of done our planning and we've previously brought the plan to this committee. So that's just confirming that, and that we intend to try and bring our audit findings report towards the end of November to the committee around that time. So we've not received the financial statements yet from the council, but I know kind of Louise and her team are working on them, and then once they're received, we will commence the audit for 22-23. In terms of value for money, so the next item on the agenda is our auditor's annual report, and that's for 21-22, so the previous year. So that reports on our value for money for that period. And then as we commence 22-23, we'll start our value for money work for that year and report back to you again, likely to be in around November. The following page, so this is agenda page 13, just reminds you of other areas that we kind of do work for the council. So we certify your housing benefit subsidy claim. So we have done the 21-22 one. That report was issued last month, and we'll commence the work on the 22-23 claim shortly. We continue to meet with officers, and it just kind of details that and the events that we provide for officers to attend if they so wish. The next page has our deliverables on. So the audit plan, as I've mentioned, has been brought to this committee in May, and there's those other deliverables. So the report on the financial statements, the auditor's report is our opinion on the financial statements, and that BFM report, so all due around the end of November. So really that is just a summary update from us, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Georgia. Anybody, any questions you'd like to raise with Georgia on that item? Okay, can I recommend that the report be noted? Okay. Item 4, the External Audit Annual Report 2021 to 22, pages 165 to 216. Again, Georgia will be running us through it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So, as just previously mentioned, this is our auditor's annual report for 21-22. So it really reports on the value for money work that we carry out. So just to remind members, as you'll be aware, this is not a judgment on whether the council delivers value for money. This is a judgment about whether you have appropriate arrangements in place to enable you to do that. So it's a bit of a subtle distinction there on what we actually are looking at. So if you look at the executive summary on page 167, it shows the three areas that we look at, which is financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, which we usually shorten to the 3Es, a little bit easier. So that also summarises our judgments for this year. So you can see in terms of financial sustainability, we haven't identified any significant weaknesses in the arrangements, but we have made some improvement recommendations. And then the other two areas we have identified significant weaknesses, which I will go through shortly. So just before I do that, what I would say is this report is a retrospective look. So it looks at the arrangements that were in place in 21-22. It's coming to yourselves obviously quite far after that year end. And that is partly because you'll be aware that Internal Audit had previously done a very detailed report on procurement that's previously been to this committee. So you'll have seen kind of a lot of the findings and recommendations have already been reflected in that internal audit report. But as your external auditor, it is kind of, you know, we're obliged to also kind of look into those issues, make sure that we're satisfied with the reporting and the recommendations, and just that, you know, if we've got anything further to report to yourselves, we would set it out here. So a lot, you'll know a lot of this information, a lot of it won't be new to you, but obviously we've now fulfilled our responsibilities in terms of that, and that's also why the timing of the report is as it is. So what I did is just to try and kind of make that a bit more clear, separated the report into two parts. So there's risk-based work, and that is the work we've undertaken around the previous issues that internal audit have reported to you around kind of procurement and onboarding of contractors at the council. So that concentrates on that. And then the second part of the report is the more kind of usual VFM report work that we carry out in the different areas. So then what I just want to explain as well in terms of kind of the recommendations we've made. So where we find what we call a significant weakness, obviously that's a more kind of pervasive and serious issue in terms of the arrangements, and we make what we call it is a key recommendation. And then the other type of recommendation you'll also see is improvement recommendations, and they're a bit more along the lines of good practice. So we're not saying there's anything flawed in the arrangements where we make an improvement recommendation. We're just saying you might like to consider this to kind of, you know, really make it more towards best practice. So hopefully that kind of sets the context for it. It's a very long report and quite detailed, so I wasn't going to go through it in kind of a lot of detail. What I thought I would do is mainly just go through the recommendations and then take questions if that's okay with yourselves. So really we've got all the detailed findings through that kind of report, and also we've got kind of on pages 179 and 180, we've got kind of the conclusions around the key areas that we thought we needed to look at. So obviously they're hopefully quite self-explanatory. And then we've got the recommendations from page 181 onwards on that kind of risk-based work. So the first one on page 181 is all around kind of the onboarding of contractors and the access they get to council systems and the consideration of that access and what kind of what the individual may actually need, and you know whether that access is actually more than they need and what the implications of that could be. So it's really a recommendation around making sure that that is like considered, you know, more closely and more carefully. And what I would say about all of these kind of recommendations we made, management have accepted the recommendations, which is obviously kind of positive from our point of view. And also because internal audit have already reported on aspects of this or most of this, you will see in kind of management's comments that there, you know, a lot of things have already been done to address these recommendations, and also things are in train to kind of continue to address them as well. So that's that one. That's, as I say, all around kind of system access and what is needed and consideration about kind of documenting that consideration of access and the audit trail around it. Then the next one on the following page, again, another key recommendation is more about kind of and how that kind of pervades across the organisation. So making sure that there are appropriate safeguards and checks and balances in place so that not only is the council protected, but the people that work for the council have also got that protection because the right safeguards are in place. So it kind of works both ways. And again, you'll see the council's already put into place a number of actions to address that and are taking further work. Undertaking further work to kind of make sure that that's also embedded and that, you know, there's no other kind of instances of it. Then the third key recommendation on page 183, again, so that's around kind of contract procedurals. So this is all the procurement side of things and really making sure that kind of those are tightened up in terms of kind of when contracts are extended, if like waivers are used, the amounts when they're extended, how that compares to the original contract that was awarded. So you can see kind of the things that we're talking about there and making sure that kind of, you know, everybody has the same information to be able to bid for those. And it's just about kind of transparency and obviously not leaving the council open to challenge in any way in terms of that process. So again, council has accepted that, already put into place a number of kind of actions and also, as I say, still doing further work to shore up kind of the capability and the capacity of that procurement team. And then the fourth key recommendation is around procurement. And that's, again, the wider view. So we kind of almost do the kind of focus view and then we go, well, what about the whole organisation? What needs to be put into place there? So this is kind of just making sure that those kind of, you know, recommendations and those, you know, responsibilities around procurement, who is responsible for what is very clear, you know, that is documented so people know where to go to kind of, you know, so they know what kind of they can and can't do or who they need to go to procure things. And, you know, about that resourcing of the procurement function and just making sure that, you know, those who do work in that have got the appropriate kind of training and qualifications. Again, council accepted it, things already in place and, you know, also kind of, you know, actions going forward as well. As I say, these issues were, you know, mostly brought out already by internal audit. So, you know, I think we're just kind of making sure that we agree with the findings and we haven't found anything, you know, else, I suppose, lurking in the background as such. And then we've got, you know, some improvement recommendations. Again, so these are more, again, towards best practice. So, you know, still, you know, ideally to be put in place and council have accepted them, but not of the seriousness of those key recommendations. So it's just making sure, again, how council staff are aware of those procurement rules and, you know, looking at the kind of the internal controls and how all that works really and just bringing that together. And, you know, there is kind of, you know, finance team members are already aware of kind of some of those circumstances. And I think it's the wider view of, you know, people outside the finance team and are they fully aware of, you know, what needs to be done. And then there's one around governance and just, you know, again, that ensuring kind of contracts and new starters have got a formal induction, you know, so they've got a really structured induction. And, you know, again, you know, they're appropriate, that's all appropriately documented. So you can see that they've had that training and that induction, you know, and that's kind of clearly kind of set out and there's an audit trail around that. Then there's another improvement recommendation. I'm just on page 187 now. So again, you know, really kind of a lot of credit to internal audit because that report was triggered by kind of a routine check by them on the creditors system. And that should give you some assurance that actually internal audit are operating as they should and picking kind of these potential issues up. And, you know, there was a kind of a thorough review by internal audit into it. And, you know, we were kind of satisfied in terms of that. But we're just kind of saying, actually, you know, there's a couple of things you might be able to do just to, you know, avoid that potential issue in the future. And that's just set out in that one. So, you know, if possible, you know, an automated interface, you know, it just depends kind of what systems can do. That might not be possible, but you just need to look at the controls that, you know, just might kind of address that issue really. And then a fourth improvement recommendation is around kind of just, you know, making sure that people's roles are kind of really tightly and appropriately defined from when they start at the council. Again, sometimes I realise that, you know, sometimes, you know, something comes up, you need to take someone on, get them in, you know, get things going. But again, you just need to make sure that they're aware and the council knows exactly what that role is and where, the, you know, that their kind of lines of responsibility start and end really. So again, and that's just to make sure there's no conflicts of interest there. So that's that one. Sorry, there's quite a few recommendations. So the fifth one is just around, again, just considering the risk in terms of the aftermath of these reports, you know, So, you know, part of this kind of review, there was a decision taken not to kind of interview the contractor involved in it, you know, and that kind of, you know, initially advised them of it, and that kind of meant, you know, they found out potentially through more informal means. And, you know, there is kind of, you know, a risk around kind of your reputation and things like that. So it's just consideration of kind of actually at what point, if something happens, do you kind of, you know, speak to that person, get that kind of, I mean, we feel maybe they should have been spoken to earlier. Obviously, we weren't in the detail of that kind of review and when it was going on, but, you know, that was kind of our view, because maybe then their kind of thoughts and the fact pattern might have just been a bit clearer a bit earlier again. So again, you know, council have agreed with that, you know, and look in terms of kind of the recommendation itself, and look at kind of, you know, recording those risks. So again, there's that audit trail of what's been considered going forward. And then the following one is just again about when there's kind of changes to organisational structure, so shared services. It's just like, for example, you know, it's just making sure that those impact assessments have kind of performed to, again, just really document that consideration of the risk around that kind of any changes to the organisational structure. So that's kind of the risk-based work. I realise there's quite a lot of recommendations there. I guess the rest of the report is a bit more, in an auditor's view, straightforward, because we're just really reporting on your arrangements, giving you the information. There's no kind of significant weaknesses, you know, in those arrangements. There's a few more improvement recommendations. I'll probably not go through them in detail because they're fairly kind of clear, I think, you know, and the kind of actions are clear related to them. So, I mean, I think that's probably perhaps enough detail to be going on with, and I'm happy to take kind of any questions around what I've talked about.
Thanks, Georgia. Any questions from members of the committee? Can I start with Councillor Hayden?
I noticed that the dates for the in-train work, as you called it, are due throughout this year, and I just wondered, are they on track?
Is this for the financial statements?
For your recommendations.
Oh, right,
with
sorry.
the management responses, and they've got dates in there of when they plan to have that work carried out.
Hi. Yes, Councillor. The management responses were prepared in consultation with their responses from the council. So yes, the dates have been set by ourselves and hopefully have felt to be reasonable in order to deliver the improvement recommendations and the key recommendations. So yes, they are on track. There will be some reporting done internally on that, and no doubt we'll keep a track of it and bring something back to you later in the year to confirm where we are with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Is that okay, Christine? Yeah. Councillor Clifford. Oh, sorry, John.
Sorry, yeah, so I was just going to say as well, then obviously we will also follow up the progress on those recommendations as part of our work for 22-23 and report back to yourselves on those as well.
I'll look more carefully around the room this time. Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Georgia. It's a very detailed report. When I first saw it, there's an awful lot in it. I had to make a phone call as well and go through it with the monitoring officer. So I'm satisfied with his responses. In terms of those management responses, you'll have seen them. On the whole, do they seem reasonable? That'd be my question to you. Thank you.
Yeah, we're happy with the management responses. So obviously we've discussed the report in detail with officers, and we've also kind of had, you know, further communication around kind of the responses and kind of, you know, management's kind of general kind of views on our findings. I will say we've had, you know, complete cooperation from officers. You know, there's been no issues around that. And in terms of the responses, we are happy that they address the recommendations that we've raised. And obviously the key thing, as we just discussed, will be then making sure they're implemented and us following them up and reporting back to you.
Thanks, Georgia. Any more questions for Georgia on that particular report? Must be me then. A couple of things. One, firstly, I think we should thank the internal audit for identifying the issue to start with. I don't propose to go into it any more than was necessary. But just on to, I think it's page 181, are our officers satisfied that safeguards are now in hand to prevent this, and secondly, to bring Georgia back in, are Grant Thornton.
I'll answer your first question. Yes, I do think this was a very particular situation that arose at a particular point in time. But by it being highlighted, we've now got in place, like you say, the safeguards that will prevent the arising again. I think it was for us as a council, it was a novel situation. And I think it's focused our attention on what we needed to have done at that point in time and what we will do moving forward.
Yeah, so what I would say is we're satisfied with the response. What we haven't done yet is actually then tested that is happening and is embedded sort of thing. So we will pick that up as much as part of the 22-23 work. So we will kind of, do some more thorough work than perhaps we would normally. If we were just doing straight kind of our VFM work, we will do an extra risk-based bit again to kind of pick up all of these recommendations, including the one you've mentioned, Chair, and make sure that we're satisfied that all the actions the Council have committed to are in place and are being enacted as well. And again, we'll bring that back to you.
Thanks very much, Georgia and Chris. Very pleased to know that we will learn going forward, as we always must. Any more questions relating to that? Any more comments? Nope. Can we move on then to item 5? Oh, sorry, George. For the benefit of the committee, Georgia is a very busy lady and she has, I won't say better things to do, but she has other things to do. We'll move on to agenda item 5, Treasury Management Outturn Report 2022 to 23, 17 to 34 in your papers, and Jean will be presenting this report.
Thank you. So this is the report that comments on Treasury management during 22-23, the compliance with the prudential and Treasury indicators during the year, and it gives details of borrowing and investments as at the 31st of March 2023. So just as a general overview, 22-23 presented a bit of a different landscape for Treasury management after the previous 2 years. Those had seen quite high levels of cash balances due to COVID grant funding, and those fell as the funding was phased out. And after extremely low interest levels in 21-22, those interest rates began to rise. And I think those trends were probably noted and reported at the mid-year Treasury review to this committee in November. And obviously interest rates have continued to rise from, I think, 0.75% in April 2022 to 4.25% March 23, and then now currently at 5%. So those have made quite a big difference to the Treasury management. So for capital financing in 2022-23, there was a capital programme of 13.5 million. And some of those schemes were Strawberry Meadows Development and Tatton. There was a financing requirement of 4.6 million, but no additional long-term loans needed to be taken out during 22-23 to fund the capital programme. Gross borrowing has been maintained within the operational boundary and the authorised limit. So for the investments, the Treasury management position is risk averse and it's organised to ensure security and liquidity before yield. Chorley has limited scope to invest as it's not cash rich. And so to manage our cash flow, cash is only held in sort of very liquid instant access accounts or on short-term deposit of maybe between 5 to 10 days with the debt management office. It gives the opportunity to earn some interest, but ensures the council has sufficient liquid resources to meet its revenue and capital commitments. Our average daily investment in 22-23 was 6.1 million, and that was down from 9.3 million in 21-22, which reflects the withdrawal of the COVID grants. The average yield was 1.72%, which is quite a big increase from 0.09% in 21-22, which reflects the rise in interest rates. During the year, all the counterparty limits and prudential indicators have been adhered to. The next formal report to the Committee on Treasury Management will be the mid-year review in November. And then there's sort of additional details on the balances at the 31st of March in Appendix A and Appendix B. And there's also more information on prudential indicators and counterparty limits in the Treasury Management Strategy, which was approved by the Council in February 22. So I've gone through it quite quickly, but I'm happy to take any questions if everybody has any.
Thanks, Jean. Any questions for Jean? Councillor Clifford?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just looking at the those yields and the rate of return. How do we make sure we can get a better return? I know it's completely different to people saving at home, where it's in the news at the moment that whilst banks are very quick to add, increase your mortgage, they're not very quick at the savings rate. But how are we looking at, when we do these short-term investments, to actually get the best return we can as interest rates have gone much higher? Thank you.
So, as I said, like Chorley's not particularly cash rich, and we have to consider like where the money is placed is secure, and if it's liquid before we consider the yield on it. So we generally look. We have money market funds, which are instant access, and the DMO, which is short term, and we will look at our cash flow for the next 3 to 4 weeks and onwards, and we can place like a reasonable amount of money. If we think we can get a better interest rate from placing it for longer, we can do that, but we can only do that if we are absolutely sure we won't need the money, because if we then place it on deposit and can't get it back, we then have to borrow money, which it rules out any gain that we would have had. So.
Thanks, Councillor Clifford. Just one point. I'm guessing also the use of balances to avoid borrowing helps from an interest rate point of view.
Yes, sure. So I think we didn't do any external borrowing to fund the capital programme last year. That's been found from internal resources. So we would borrow if we had to. Yeah, it is cheaper to use internal resources than not.
Thanks, Jean. Any more questions for Jean? No. Okay, this report is for noting. Are we happy to note the report? Number 6. The CIPFA Audit Committee's Practical Guidance for Local Authorities and Police, pages 35 to 124. Dawn, who apparently thinks this is a fantastic document, will take us through it.
It's true, I do. Thank you, Chair. So as has been said, this report sets out the latest CIPFA guidance for and position statement for audit committees, which is in effect the governance committee. The guidance is attached, hence the extra long report. It's for you to read and digest at this stage, because what it does, it represents best practice of what a good audit committee looks like, what the composition of the committee is, the purpose, the model, and the core functions of it as well. So it's for you to gain that understanding at this stage and highlight any queries that you might have. Included, you'll see as well in the guidance, there are a couple of appendices at the back. One's a suggested terms of reference, and the other one is a self-assessment. So what we will be doing over the course of the next few weeks is we'll be looking at the self-assessment and making sure what we do as a council represents best practice and you're getting the right information at the right time. And then we'll also be looking at the terms of reference, and both of those documents will be coming back for you to consider at the meeting in September. The report also goes on to say about the skills and knowledge that the committee should possess. And I understand, you know, when you come in at the time that you start on this committee, it does take time, and you need, you know, to get a view of the whole year, really, to understand all the various reports that will come. But what we're asking is that you fill in the skills and knowledge. I've attached them on your desks already, so that we can gauge where we need to help the committee and provide training, so that, you know, you're in the best position you can be to fulfil your role on this committee. So yeah, if you could fill in the questionnaire, please, and let us have it back by the end of August. We'll include that, the information. It's all anonymous, so feel free to be honest. We'll include that level of information and what training we'll need to deliver when we come back to the committee in September. But otherwise, please read and enjoy. It's a lovely report.
Thanks, Dawn. Any questions on this rather lengthy tome? Is any, I'm sure we all read with great interest. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just to echo some of what Dawn has said, really, and just encourage you to have a good look at the guidance document. It's not a novel that you're perhaps going to enjoy reading on holiday, but it is a good point of reference for you, and it's called Practical Guidance for a reason. It'll give you a chance to apply some of what's said in it at different meetings, and it'll help you structure any comments you want to make or understand your involvement in the governance committee process. So it is a bit of a daunting document when you first look at it, because it is quite long, and anything which says guidance on it and it's 100 pages long, you immediately think, oh my God. But you can break it down and look at the different sections of it at different times. And I do think you will find it of some assistance in fulfilling your roles on this committee to use it, not just now, but just to keep going back to it as a point of reference.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, when you read the new guidance, it does stress the importance of audit committee. A previous chairman I served under, ex-councillor Tony G, always used to say this is the most important committee on this council. Now, I have since been told that might have been because he was the chair, but I don't believe that. It is very important, and any assistance we can give the officers with what training is needed, what is required, we must do it. Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's I've managed in the break earlier to complete mine, so thank you for sending those out. I mean, my recommendation, I'll be interested to see the recommendations on training. I do feel it's always worth being overtrained than undertrained, so maybe more bite-sized briefings to make sure that all members are fully up to scratch on this, but I'm looking forward to seeing the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair. I just think I'm a newly appointed councillor, as you know, and I think a couple of people with me have probably got a lot more experience than I have. But I just thought it might be useful if we could have a joint meeting together, the council committee members, to see how we feel about the way that we're approaching the governance process.
If everybody's in agreement, I'm sure we could set something up. Is that yeah? Thanks. I mean, the other thing in the document was Appendix E, which is on page 115, which is a self-assessment of good practice, which, again, appears to be a very, very detailed item and is probably worth looking at as well. With this particular item, the committee is to consider the attached guidance and assist with the review of the skills and knowledge. Item 7, Chair of Governance Committee, response to external audit planning enquiries, pages 125 to 132. And Dawn will.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the responses, as you say, to the planning inquiries made by external audit. It's completed, like I say, on behalf of the Chair. We've attached all the responses, and really it's just for the committee to be satisfied that they're an accurate reflection.
Anyone disagree with the responses of the Chair of the Governance Committee? Councillor Hayden.
I wouldn't say that I disagree with them, but I think in some places they could be made a little bit more explicit and have a bit more meaningful dialogue. For example, the fraud risk, and it's mentioned that on the fourth box, the bottom one on the page, have any specific fraud risks or area with a high risk of fraud been identified? And what has been done to mitigate this risk? And it says the areas most at risk of fraud are where cash transactions can be manipulated. I don't think that's the only place where fraud is a risk. I think there are more areas that can be, internal fraud and external fraud. So I think there are more areas than that.
Yeah, we've continued to say that high-risk fraud areas we consider within the audit plan when we're doing them, and within every internal audit review that we carry out, we consider the risk of fraud.
Yeah. I think, do you kind of like have a look at your processes and your procedures to identify where in the processes the risk could be, or the area of fraud could be generated, and put the controls, either system or management controls in place and embedded, not just looked at as a, like on a risk register, but actually embedded into business practices.
Yeah, so when we undertake the review, we will look at it from an end-to-end review, really, and consider fraud in all aspects of it. So, yeah, and then we will look at, like you said, things like what controls are in place, separation of duties, supervisory reviews, making sure that there's more than one person involved in transactions where there are high risks. So, yeah, we take all those factors into account when we're doing our audit reviews.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Christina. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one question around. It says, how do the council communicate and encourage ethical behaviour of its staff and contractors? There's reference there to the employee code of conduct. Does that extend to the member code of conduct as well?
With the question specific to officers and contractors, so no, it wouldn't unless the member were a quite surprising, really, given the controls we've got in place, but it's not necessarily unheard of, particularly in bigger authorities. So, no, it wouldn't in relation to this.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Hayden again.
Sorry, it's just on the next table for the law and regulation table, and the question: how do management gain assurance that all relevant laws and regulations have been complied with? The first paragraph in that response is that the monitoring officer, which is, I suppose, Chris over there, receives and comments executive decisions. To me, in that box, it will be that how are changes to law and enforcement regulations, how are they impacted initially by the council, and make sure that there is sufficient changes to the processes, training, etc. And again, embedding new processes to make sure that those laws are adhered to. And the backstop would be that, yes, you would monitor the decisions that are made by various committees to make sure that they are all fair. But I think just be a little clearer in that it's already embedded within the process. It's impacted when a new change of legislation comes in, that it is impacted fully and analysed across the business areas, and the procedures are updated, etc. And then monitored through decision making.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I think I take your point, and I think I think what you're getting at is we don't mention what training I get and how I keep abreast of the legal situation, and similarly for directorate teams and service teams who, you know, the professional services who work within legal frameworks as well. We do have our personal continuing professional development requirements, which set out the expectations for ensuring that we are abreast of changes to legislation, and we're also members of professional groups. So I'm a member of the Lawyers in Local Government, where we receive updates on changes to legislation as well as other mailing lists. And there's similar organisations for licensing and for environmental health and so on. So, I mean, we responded to this question, or the response was put together on the basis of how the council attained assurance that we are acting lawfully. Well, council decisions are moderated through myself as monitoring officer or my deputy who review. And in fact, it goes through 2 stages. So the legal team, somebody in the legal team different to myself, will review the report before it comes to me as well. So you get that double level of check on legal compliance, because, you know, we all have our different skills and experience and knowledge.
Yeah.
So there is quite a lot of redundancy built into it. I mean, I don't know, we've shared this in draft, haven't we? So we could add to that response.
I think it's just to establish that it's not a reactive process, that
Yeah.
it's a proactive process
Yeah.
with all the correct controls and balances, as it should be for every question that's on there, you know, it
Yeah.
should be embedded properly and analysed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just really on that point, and I've noticed in the Governance Committee Knowledge and Skills Framework, there was a couple of questions. One revolves around the monitoring officer. There's also one revolves around the internal audit side as well, that you have the sufficient knowledge in that. And actually, I've probably scored them low in reality, because we often get details on what is, you know, going on, but those bad questions don't often come up. And this is where I'm hoping, as part of the recommendations, we do some more bite-sized briefings, that where we go into this is all part of further training that I think is needed for all members, and I think that will be useful. Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Sorry, I would actually add to that, and going back to what I said, where it says mandatory fraud awareness training for all staff is repeated. I think it'd be very useful for members as well, given it's one of the knowledge things on there, and if it's reported into governors, then we should probably have the same training as what the staff have for fraud awareness.
Okay. Could I just check with Don? The responses were to specific questions, weren't they? Yeah. Okay. On that score, then, if there are no more questions, can we approve the responses to the auditor's enquiries with the addition of Councillor Hayden's comments? Okay, thank you. Thank you. We will now get on to the strategic risk review, pages 133 to 160, and Carolyn will be helping us.
Thank you. So this is a Strategic Risk Register report, which provides an annual update on the Council's Strategic Risk Register, which has been reviewed throughout the year by the senior management team. So this sets out the key strategic risks to the Council, and the control measures and mitigating actions which are in place to help manage those risks. So the report sets out the highest scoring risks, any changes to the risk scores since the last time that the register was presented to the committee, and then also a summary of all the risks on the register. So looking at the highest scoring risks, many of these risks are focusing on service delivery, large-scale capital projects, and working with partners to deliver outcomes. So that's reflecting some of the pressures that the council faces in terms of the budgetary pressures, uncertainty from the national economic context, and are being managed through the medium-term financial strategy and transformation programme. And then some of the other risks, some of the key risks and the highest risks are related to ICT security due to the potential impact on business continuity and reputational damage that this could cause. And so there's governance and information security frameworks in place to help manage that risk alongside delivering improvements to ICT security through the Council's ICT plan. In terms of changes to the risk scores, there's been one risk which has increased in score, one which has decreased, and then some risks which have been added or removed from the register. So we've got risk 14, which is around the failure of shared services arrangements. So this has decreased in score based on the existing shared services, which have become more embedded over the last year, and also the increased staff satisfaction for the newly shared services within the recent staff pulse survey. And then we've got risk 11, which is incidents affecting service delivery. So this has increased in risk score, and that's to reflect the risk of industrial action and the impact that that could have on delivering services. But a plan is in place to prioritise services and redeploy staff to minimise the impact that industrial action would have if it was to go ahead. A new risk has been identified at risk 15 for failure to act to address the impact of climate change. And that's to reflect both the reputational risk but also the impact on communities from the result of climate change. And then there's the risk from failure to manage the recovery from COVID-19, and that's been removed from the risk register to reflect that that recovery work has now become part of business as usual for the council as we move further away from the pandemic, including sort of the wider fallouts in terms of the cost of living crisis. So the full risk register is set out in the report. It's just if there's any questions.
Thank you, Caroline. Any questions? Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just one, and that would be that the removal from the failure to manage recovery from COVID-19 effectively. Should that not have maybe been replaced by preparation for further serious incident, a future pandemic? I mean, maybe it'll be in 100 years' time, or maybe in 5 years' time. We just don't know.
Yeah, I think there is a risk in the risk relating to service delivery. I think that does capture some of the impact. I'm just trying to find it now. I think that does capture some of the impacts of things like pandemics or other significant incidents. I can't find it, but R11. Yes, that's incidents affecting service delivery and business continuity, or widespread damage, injury, or risk to the public. So that would sort of take into account incidents that would require sort of an emergency response from the council.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Clifford. Any more questions? Councillor Hayden.
General one, please. Do you use a lessons learned log or anything like that when you've had issues and risks? Do you document it anywhere and implement it, update you?
Well, it's part of the process we do when we review the risk register at SMT. So the senior management team own the strategic risk register. If there have been specific incidents, there will be specific review sessions. So there were a number of review sessions in relation to COVID, for example, where we reviewed what went well and what didn't go so well, particularly around the business continuity side for the council. But it's not part of the strategic risk register as such. This is more of a living document where we review it at a point in time and say, has this risk moved or not? Or it's brought to SMT saying this risk has moved as a result of a change in circumstances rather than a scheduled review. So individual items, yes, but as part of the review of the risk register, no.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm guessing in with regard to Councillor Clifford's comments, I'm pretty sure I did see on the news recently that COVID is on the increase again. But again, I would imagine somewhere in here there will be provision to, because this is a living document, it would move in accordance with the times.
We've kind of adopted, taking the point made earlier, we've adapted things like our business continuity plans, you know, to reflect changes that we experienced during COVID, because again, they're something that we're constantly looking to improve and amend. I mean, there was a significant investment in IT in that early period. Well, actually, we were fortunate in that we'd done quite a lot of that work ahead of time. It's just we had to bring forward the implementation of it to the start of the pandemic. So we're already set up in some respect to deliver on some of the issues. And we've got the structures in place now because we had to put them in place to deal with some of the resident support work that was done by the council. So it wouldn't be, again, something that would necessarily go in now, but were a similar incident to arise, then yes, it would come in as a strategic risk at that point because it had crystallised. So we'd take it out of R11 and give it its own category again. And similarly, I think you can see that we've done that with the climate emergency, where that's got specific impacts on residents and reputation for the council because it's become a council priority. That's now a strategic risk for the council. Again, that will fluctuate. I mean, had we been 5 years ago with that one, it probably would be higher because we wouldn't have done the Croston flood defence works. So, of course, the impact issue was much more significant potentially than it is now.
Thanks, Chris. No more? Thank you very much. We're asked to note the strategic risks and controls in place and actions planned to further mitigate risk as set out in this report. Can we note the report? Thank you. The evergreen item 9, the RIPA application update, which I'm guessing will be very brief.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just in light of a comment from last time, this is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which relates to covert surveillance and use of human intelligence sources for the getting of evidence. There is a process in place now, which there's an internal and external process in relation to getting RIPA authorisations. We have not needed to get any RIPA authorisations for any of the work that we've done, investigations that we've done to date, so there's nothing to report.
As usual. Thanks, Chris. We'll move on to item 10, which is the work programme, pages 161 to 162. I think we will have a slight amendment to the September meeting, which will be to, which I'm sure Dawn will just be able to explain to us.
Sorry, we'll add on the self-assessment and the results of the skills and knowledge exercise as well.
Thanks, Dawn. Given that, we're on to item 11. I've had no urgent business brought to me to agree to, so I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.